or Parliament representation, Chairperson of the ST&I Business Forum, Mr. Tilson Mpati Manyoni, members of the ST&I Business Forum and our Governance Board, Mr. Hussein Karichka, CEO of the Mail and Guardian, ST&I Business Forum Strategic Media Partner, our distinguished guests and industry voices, esteemed leaders of business, government, academia, and the media. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, welcome. Good evening. My name is Dr. Nomhlingwenya, Chief Executive Officer of the Science, Technology and Innovation Business Forum, also known as ST&I Business Forum. And it is my profound honor to welcome you all to the inaugural ST&I public lecture and to serve as your program director this evening. Many months ago, I had the pleasure of a robust discussion with the chairperson of the ST&I Business Forum, Mr. Tilson Mpati Manyoni, on the future of science, technology, and innovation in this country. It was the kind of conversation that doesn't really let you go, but really lingers on. And when he outlined his vision for this organization, a permanent bridge between business, government, and academia in service of a knowledge economy, he approached me to serve as a CEO. I did not hesitate, and tonight you will find out exactly why. The timing of this evening is no accident. Last month, we celebrated Youth Month, a tribute to the generation of 1976 and a charge of the generation of today. And this month, the department has launched July as the National Science Month. I stand before you at the intersection of these two commemorations as a young South African entrusted with leading an institution, and I can tell you, young people are not waiting to be invited into the future of this country's science and innovation ecosystem. We are ready to lead it, and I'm honored, humbled to lead something this monumental. Allow me to quickly frame this evening with the thinking of one of the world's leading innovation scholars, Professor Mariana Mazzucato. Her moonshot approach to science and innovation policy asks us to redefine the role of the state and business in to become proactive market creators that shape where an economy is going. Her inspiration is the Apollo space program, a bold, outcome-orientated mission that mobilizes government, business, and science around a single audacious goal, and in so doing, creating entire industries. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, what is our moonshot? That is precisely the question this evening's theme places before us, a public-private partnership model for science and innovation. Because a moonshot is never launched by government or by business or by science alone. It is launched by all these, pulling in the same direction. And our program this evening directly reflects that. The core theme of the ST&I Business Forum states, we cannot change the past, but we can change the future. Allow us to shape the future this evening. I would like to introduce our strategic media partner, Mail and Guardian, Mr. Hussein Karichka, CEO, to please give the introduction and welcome remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I think that I probably met Tilson Manyoni long before you met him, and it was also a very casual conversation over lunch or breakfast. And but when he told me about his idea and what he wanted to do, it resonated so. So, Honourable Minister, distinguished guests, honoured speakers, innovators, researchers, business leaders, policy makers, partners and friends. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2026 inaugural Science and Technology and Innovation Public Lecture. On behalf of everyone at the Science and Technology and Innovation Business Forum and the Mail and Guardian, thank you for being here and for bringing your expertise, curiosity, and commitment to shaping South Africa's future. At the Mail and Guardian, we have always believed that journalism is about more than just reporting events. It's about helping society ask better questions, challenge assumptions, and imagine better possibilities. There are few areas where the mission is more important than science, technology, and innovation. But we are living through a period of extraordinary change. Artificial intelligence is reshaping industries. Biotechnology is transforming healthcare. Clean energy is redefining economies. Space technologies, quantum computing, and advanced manufacturing are moving from the margins to the mainstream. And the pace of change is breathtaking. But so too are the opportunities. The question before us is not whether these technologies will change our world. They already are. The real question is, who will benefit? Will innovation deepen inequality, or will it expand opportunity? Will technology divide us further, or will it help solve some of our greatest challenges? Will Africa merely consume innovation developed elsewhere, or will we become creators, pioneers, and exporters of knowledge and technology? They are not simply scientific or technological questions. They are economic questions, they are ethical questions, and they are leadership questions. And that is why gatherings like this really matter. The annual lecture will bring together people who don't always occupy the same spaces, like scientists and entrepreneurs and investors, academics, government and industry, established leaders and emerging innovators. And it is at these intersections where the most exciting ideas are born. South Africa is no shortage of talent. We have world-class researchers, remarkable entrepreneurs, and young people with extraordinary imagination. And the Mail and Guardian recognizes these individuals each year at our annual 200 Young South Africans event. And what a great cohort of individuals we identify each year. And Mister, I'd like to invite you to the event later on this month, where we'll be celebrating and recognizing those individuals. It is quite amazing to meet these young group of South Africans who really want to make a difference and who really want to contribute with their great ideas, and always leaves one with a sense of a good feeling that there's a better future out there and South Africa will be in good hands. But we need to have stronger collaboration, great investment, and confidence to back bold ideas. Innovation flourishes where there's openness, trust, and a willingness to challenge conventional thinking. It flourishes when evidence informs policy, when business invests in the long term, and when institutions create environments where creativity can thrive. As a newspaper, the Mail and Guardian has a unique role to play. We are not scientists or engineers or venture capitalists, but we are storytellers, and we shine a light on important ideas. We hold power to account, and we create spaces where informed public debate can flourish. Because innovation is not only about laboratories and patents, it's about people. It's about improving lives, strengthening communities, creating jobs, and building society that is more prosperous, more inclusive, and more resilient. Today's conversation has the potential to spark new partnerships, new investments, and new ways of thinking. Some of the ideas shared here may become tomorrow's breakthrough companies. It may transform policy or life-changing discoveries. So this really is an exciting prospect. And I encourage each of you to engage openly, to challenge respectfully, of course, to listen and to think ambitiously. The future is will not simply happen to us. It will be built by people willing to imagine it and then work together and make it real. Thank you to all our partners, the organizers, whose dedication has made this annual lecture possible. Your commitment demonstrates that innovation is not the responsibility of one sector alone. It's a shared national endeavor. And to everyone attending today, thank you for investing your time and your ideas in this important conversation. And I wish you all a pleasant evening. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much to the CEO of Mayor and Guardian for the opening and welcome remarks. I'd like us to move to the next session, which is the themed session, a public-private partnership model for science and innovation. I'd like to call up on the stage our presenters, Professor Rodney Priestley from Princeton University and the Africa World Initiative.
Good evening. Try that one more time. See if we get a little bit more energy in here. Good evening. Thank you very much. There we go. It is a genuine honor to be here, to be a part of this inaugural Science, Technology, and Innovation public lecture in South Africa. I am privileged to share this stage with such distinguished guests, including the Honorable Minister, as well as other distinguished speakers. And I want to begin by thanking Mr. Tilson, our chairperson, for the invitation and for the vision behind convening of this forum. Now, I'm not the only Princeton professor in the room this evening. I also want to acknowledge a friend and colleague, Professor Chika, for his leadership of the Africa World Initiative at Princeton, which will be important to moving this forum forward and to the mission of the African Innovation Council. I've been asked to offer an academic voice tonight. What I hope to offer is a frank account of what we've learned at Princeton and in my own work as a researcher and an entrepreneur about how universities working in partnership with government and industry can spark innovation and entrepreneurship that can genuinely improve society. To begin, the American innovation system was not an accident. It was a deliberate policy choice made at a specific moment in history. In 1945, Vannevar Bush, who led US wartime research efforts, wrote a report to President Roosevelt called Science, the Endless Frontier. His argument was straightforward, and at the time, fairly radical. The federal government should invest in basic research at universities without requiring that that research have an immediate practical impact. Trust the scientists, Bush said. Fund curiosity-driven research. And the applications, the medicines, the technologies, the industries will follow. What Bush understood at that point was you just did not know what advances and what discoveries will matter in the future. That report led directly to the creation of the National Science Foundation, the expansion of the National Institutes of Health, and the transformation of the American Research University into engines of discovery as we know them now. It created the American University as we know it, the expansion of STEM graduate education, funded mostly by the federal government. It helped make American universities the magnet for talent around the world as they are today. And as the current dean of the graduate school at Princeton, I can attest to how important this transformational policy change was. In fact, at Princeton and at most American research universities, all of STEM graduate education is supported by the federal government. The lesson here is not that one needs to implement the policy that Bush recommended in 1945. The lesson is the underlying philosophy. Patience and long-term public investment in research is the foundation from which everything else rests. Without it, there is nothing to commercialize, nothing to transfer, and nothing to build companies from. This approach also ensures that whatever new science is discovered and the industries and jobs that it will create, the nation will be a part of it. It is accurate to state that an investment in basic research is literally an investment in the future. Any nation should ask itself whether its science policy reflect aspects of this philosophy. Another important American policy moment came 35 years later, and is equally important, and one directed directly at the American Research University that the Bush Report helped to create. Before 1980, any invention that emerged from federally funded research belonged to the federal government. The result was perhaps predictable. Tens of thousands of patents developed by university faculty and students went unused. An incredible amount of knowledge was generated. The inventions were real, but nothing was developed. All new knowledge stayed in scientific journals, read only by scientists. was not Bush's intention. The Bayh-Dole Act changed that by changing one thing: ownership. Moving forward, universities would now own the intellectual property generated by their researchers, even when that research was publicly funded by the federal government. They could license it, they could create startups, and they could share royalties with the faculty and students, i.e., the inventors of that technology. What followed was a transformation. Places like Stanford, MIT, Princeton, and other schools all built technology transfer operations that helped spark new industries. For instance, the biotechnology industry, as we now know it today, traces its origins directly back to the Bayh-Dole Act. It turned university labs from archives of discovery into launch pads for companies. It also created tremendous financial benefits for universities. For example, at my own institution, Princeton University, the royalties from a single patent that went on to save thousands of lives funded the construction of our new chemistry building and continues to this day to fund graduate fellowships in chemistry. I am also not speaking about this abstractly. The policy change has impacted my own career as an academic. I have both licensed technology to establish companies and used it to create new ones. A question for any government is whether their IP policy ignites or diminishes the flames of technology transfer. A question for any university is whether its IP policies and practices, for instance, revenue sharing with its faculty, encourage faculty and students to create startups. Appropriate government science policy, along with university policies and practices, are necessary for universities to drive innovation and entrepreneurship, but they are not sufficient on their own. They exist within a broader innovation ecosystem, and that ecosystem determines whether or not the inventions at a university are accelerated or constrained by the knowledge that they create. There are multiple frameworks for innovation. I like this one here because it addresses three interdependent elements that determine whether innovation and entrepreneurship can flourish. Government actions set the ground rules for how the game is played, how easy it is to register a business, what are the tax incentives for research and development, and how intellectual property rights are protected. These things matter whether or not the intellectual property was developed at a university or in a business entity. The business environment itself determines whether capital flows to good ideas. Are there venture investors, angel networks, federal institutions willing to back early stage deep technology? And culture, perhaps most importantly, shapes whether talented people, in this case the faculty and the students at universities, even try to play the game. Is entrepreneurship by faculty a respected choice? For a long time at Princeton, that was not true. Of course, that is no longer the case. In addition, the interactions between these elements are also critically important. Building a genuine innovation ecosystem requires all three to be working simultaneously. You can have world-class science, but poor commercialization infrastructure. You can have capital, but no deal flow. You can have policy, but no culture. The whole system has to function together. Within this ecosystem, I've highlighted universities and academics over here in the bottom right. And that is what I'd like to spend some time discussing. Around the time Princeton expanded its commitment to innovation and entrepreneurship, it created a university-wide position to lead those efforts. I was honored to hold that position for several years, and what I'll speak about today is the work that I and my colleagues accomplished together. I also want to acknowledge my colleague, Professor Craig Arnold, who currently helms Princeton Innovation. When I took on the mantle, the university shared this book with its leaders to learn from the past. The book, A Boulevard of Broken Dreams, carefully documents why most government efforts to stimulate innovation and entrepreneurship did not achieve what they set out to do. Now, that is not a reason for pessimism. In fact, it is a reason for optimism, because it clarifies what the evidence actually shows and what is possible when done right. The failures cluster around common mistakes, programs that treat innovation as a linear process that can be managed by a plan, initiatives that are too rigid to respond to the realities on the ground, efforts that expect results on political timescales when ecosystems take much more time to mature. While this book and the critique was directed at governments, I think the same can be said of universities as well. What the successful efforts all share in common is the opposite. They are designed with humility, built with flexibility, evaluated honestly, and sustained over time by institutions that outlast any single government, university president, or funding cycle. I share this tonight because this room includes people with the power to design policy, fund programs, and build institutions. The evidence should inform those choices, both in government and at the university. That has certainly been true for us at Princeton University. Now, the university, for its part, has its own micro-innovation ecosystem that must interact with the broader one. This slide shows the web of interactions that make up the university-anchored innovation ecosystem and how it functions and how the three different structures work together in concert. First and foremost, the university itself must commit to these efforts, not just research output, but institutional commitment to technology licensing, support for translational research, physical resources like labs and makerspaces, and seed support for early stage ventures. These commitments help make the entrepreneurial activity possible. Without them, the wheels of innovation on a campus will certainly not turn. The academic community is the heartbeat. The people are the beating heart of this system. And what do they need? What they need to succeed is a genuinely supportive environment, access to mentors and training, the ability to protect intellectual property, the ability to de-risk both the technology and the market. Most of these may appear obvious, but they're not always available within a single university ecosystem. Finally, the university must interact with external stakeholders. Industry, investors, incubators, government, alumni networks, etc. These are the players that receive and help amplify what the university seeks to accomplish. Any good university will help to make these interactions not only possible, but smooth. The key insight is that universities are a core part of the ecosystem. They not only train the workforce, but also create the science of the future, which is why investing in university research and innovation is not simply an education strategy, it is also an innovation strategy. So, what does the innovation process look like in an academic setting? For many universities, it perhaps looks something like this, and perhaps this is familiar to many of the academics in the room. You start with an idea that leads to research and hopefully discovery. And of course, this process itself is iterative. That is what Bush intended with the idea that the federal government should fund only curiosity-driven research without an application in mind. Now, if there is potential for technology transfer, the idea is patented before publication. Still keeping in mind that publication is the currency of the modern academy. Most universities now have tech transfer offices that assist with the filing of intellectual property. These offices often now have at least one person who can solicit licensing opportunities or even help faculty members create a startup from the technical sense. And by that I mean help with the formulation of creating a company. But is that enough? More importantly, is it enough for any chance of success for an early stage startup? If you look at the slide behind me, you can ask yourselves, what is missing? And perhaps quite a bit. And perhaps those from industry can recognize it right away, what is missing. Here's how we consider to modify this innovation process at Princeton. An academic innovation ecosystem that develops the means to support the full innovation process. Therefore, in addition to traditional support, we sought to expand the process to include steps that are more readily recognizable in the business world, but are often lacking in an academic setting. For the most part, these additional steps center around de-risking the technology and finding a true product market fit. Here, access to space and very early stage capital may be important, but including these steps is critical to fully understanding whether a technology is a real solution and has real commercial viability. I argue that engaging in this process in an academic setting is cheaper and carries less risk than in the commercial sector. And so in building an academic innovation ecosystem, a university should consider structures that support the entire process. Now, if that is the academic innovation process, what are the ingredients that a university needs to support it? First, deep education and training, graduate programs, doctoral training, postdoctoral training, essentially the full talent pipeline that will make the discoveries and help to bring them to the market. Second, research excellence. The quality of the science matters. Universities that are primarily teaching institutions cannot anchor an innovation ecosystem in a way that a research university can. Both are valuable, but they serve different functions. Third, support for new ventures. The infrastructure to help researchers and students cross the so-called valley of death. Proof of concept funds, incubators, entrepreneurship training, mentorship from experienced founders. This does not happen spontaneously. It must be built and funded by the university. Fourth, industry collaborations. Mechanisms both formal and informal for the university and the private sector to work together. Sponsored research agreements, visiting scientist programs, industry advisory boards, and now co-location schemes where industry and universities share spaces. Fifth, technology transfer. The professional staff who knows how to evaluate IP, file patents, find licensees, and support spin-outs. This is an investment that more and more universities are now starting to make. And sixth, global networks. Science is an international enterprise. The value of connecting one's researchers to the world cannot be overstated. While these ingredients are necessary, they are not sufficient. As noted earlier, the deeper question and the harder question is one of culture. At many universities around the world, there is still a tension between the traditional academic mission, rigorous scholarship, publishing, teaching, and the entrepreneurial spirit to take discoveries to the market. But that tension does not have to exist. These efforts are essentially an expansion of what a university does, not an elimination of any aspect of it. In fact, I often state that probably no more than 10 to 20% of the university faculty in STEM areas should participate in entrepreneurship. It is not for everyone, and that is okay, The university has a broad mission. However, faculty who do spend time building companies should not be seen as less serious scholars. Students who pursue startups instead of doctoral programs are sometimes viewed as opting out of the academic pathway. This tension is real, and it shapes behavior at every level. Changing culture requires explicit, deliberate signals from university leadership. Promotion and tenure processes may need to recognize both commercial activity and rigorous scholarship. Indeed, rigorous scholarship is the foundation of the commercial activity. A faculty member who publishes an important work and starts a company that employs 50 people should be recognized for both. Risk-taking needs to be celebrated. A researcher who pursues a bold hypothesis that did not pan out should be respected. A founder whose first company failed should be valued for what they learned. And entrepreneurship needs to be honored intentionally through prizes, through endowed programs, through visible symbols that signal the university believes that taking knowledge into the world is part of its mission. At Princeton, we've been on that journey. And here I just highlight a few ways in which the university has sought to expand its culture of innovation and entrepreneurship and send those signals that I spoke about to our faculty and to our students that these efforts were valued at the university, including the launching of several publications as well as the creation of the Dean for Research Award for Distinguished Innovation that now sits alongside the university's award for distinguished teaching and distinguished mentoring for recognizing our faculty for innovation and their entrepreneurial efforts. The ecosystem that we built at Princeton continues to expand. Each of these structures was designed specifically to help faculty and students along their entrepreneurial journey. For instance, the I-Corps program is a 6-week program that's federally funded by the National Science Foundation that brings faculty and their co-founders together for training not only in business, but in product market fit, where the core activity of the I-Corps program is that the faculty have to participate in a minimum of 50 interviews with potential customers for the technology that they're trying to bring to the market. The Princeton Innovation Center, LLC, is our innovation space a stone's throw away from the campus, where faculty have access to commercialize their technology not too far away from our main campus. The Princeton Entrepreneurship Council provides educational opportunities for our faculty and students to learn about entrepreneurship and 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 to learn about business. established a program called the Innovation Fund for industry collaborations. If a Princeton faculty member could find an industry partner willing to provide $75K in support for research, the university would provide another $175K in support for a total amount of $250,000 for research. This was a program, again, designed to incentivize industry to engage with Princeton. Around the same time, we developed a partnership with the Google AI, and here was the first time we were allowed Princeton faculty to have essentially co-appointments between the university and an industry partner. That was truly unique for us at the time. The final point I'll mention here is something that's relatively new that has been launched by my colleagues that I think more than a decade ago people would have probably thought never imaginable at Princeton. At Princeton University, along with the state of New Jersey, Microsoft and CoreWeave recently had a ribbon cutting ceremony launching the New Jersey AI Hub. And as you can see here by the written words, it is the first of its kind public-private partnership that Princeton has participated in that brings together a wide variety of stakeholders to expand world-class research and development in AI, and from the point of view of the state, to empower the workforce in this world of AI. So, if I come back to this academic innovation process, and I've just laid out what are the structures we've developed here at Princeton, one of the things we sought to do was to ensure that those structures mapped onto this process such that our faculty could move through it with the support that they needed. For instance, we have provided gap funding through our partnership with IntelliSpark, such that when research was developed and before IP was disclosed, there was funding available to get over that valley of debt. I mentioned the partnership with Wharton and with VentureWell to train our faculty in entrepreneurship, the I-Corps program to provide real training and product market fit, and then the funding and the spaces that were necessary. And before we move on, I should be clear about one thing. While I have drawn this pipeline as linear, it is not. It is iterative and it is messy, but it is real. And I think the university is the only institution whose core sustains all of these stages simultaneously. Now, perhaps the best way I can tell the story of how the ecosystem that I just described helped faculty create startups from their research is to tell my own personal story. I'll be fairly brief, hopefully, but as you know, when faculty begin to talk about their research, they can sometimes get long-winded. There will be a quiz after this, and so I hope everyone pays attention. I'm just joking. This is my incredible research group on the steps of Clio Hall, which is the home of the graduate school at Princeton University. My research is in polymer science and engineering. I am a professor of chemical and biological engineering and of material science and engineering at Princeton, and I've been on the faculty for the past 18 years. My research is primarily experimental, but more and more we are endeavoring into theory and simulations. We study plastics, and in particular, we study the behavior of plastics at interfaces and in confined environments, not only to develop new science, but also innovations. And I want to share two research topics that led to startups. I promise there will be no chemistry, there will be no equations, and there will be no math either. So, topic one, water purification. One might imagine that water purification is not a science or technology that is a primary concern in the United States, but in fact it is, and I'll highlight it here in this slide. Not long ago, in fact, in Flint, Michigan, there was a man-made waterborne crisis where the government decided to switch the water supply in Flint, Michigan from the Detroit River to the Flint River. At the time, many felt that they knew that that was a wrong decision and that the water in the Flint River was not safe drinking water. This was, again, as I said, a human-made crisis. More than 100,000 people were impacted. And the government response was actually quite poor. It took more than 18 months of research to convince them that the water supply was not safe. Fast forward a few years later in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, this was not man-made, this was a natural-made disaster, but in fact, the water purification facility there was not working properly. And here you have more than 150,000 residents who are without safe drinking water for more than a week. And this may seem like two isolated incidents, but in fact, research published in top journals actually suggests that water quality issues are more widespread in the U.S. than what is known. And so developing technologies that can be modular and low energy to provide on-site water purification is a real opportunity. And that is the opportunity we sought out to do in my research several years ago. The technology we developed at the time was called the solar absorber gel technology for water purification. It is based on the use of hydrogels, which are essentially polymers that love water at low temperatures and really do not like water at high temperatures. The concept here is relatively straightforward. We take this hydrogel material, we embed it in other layers of polymers. If we then place it in contact with a contaminated water source at low temperatures, it would absorb pure water while expelling the impurities. If you then take this gel and expose it to heat, in this case natural sunlight, because we were trying to develop a low energy technology, it would then begin to not like water. It would become hydrophobic and expel out the clean water. This process in and of itself should be repeatable. I said no chemistry, but a few images here just to show you what the gel looks like. In its final iteration, it is this black piece of material down here. And here's a demonstration of the gel working in the lake behind Princeton University, Carnegie Lake. What you see here is the gel, the black membrane, and it is floating on top of a plastic container. And what you will see in this video, besides the arms of my students taking this gel out of the water, is in fact, when the gel comes out of the water, it will be exposed to sun. It is the natural sunlight that is driving this phase transformation, and it is that phase transformation that will lead to the expel of pure water from this lake. And so what you see here are droplets of pure water that begins to come out. And in certain later iterations of this technology, we've developed it where now this process is much faster. I'm going to speed up through this and just show you what some of the end results are. If you take lead, for instance, which is a known contaminant that lowers IQ, that is still a major problem in major cities, you can see here that this membrane can purify lead. It can purify nitrates, it can remove oil from water, it can separate yeast from water as well. And so this technology was not only published at Princeton, it was patented at Princeton, which means it was owned by the university, received a lot of attention, and as a result of that, we established a spin-out company several years ago called Aquapow to bring this technology to commercialization. Now, what's the strength of the university connection here? I began this research on hydrogels on another project completely unrelated to water purification itself. We were able to de-risk the technology in my lab at Princeton. Princeton was able to license the technology from Aquapow, in fact negotiating on my behalf with the CEO of Aquapow as well as the funders. Aquapow, because the research was previously supported by the National Science Foundation, received additional support from the National Science Foundation as well as the state government of New Jersey. And we also participated in this NSF I-Corps program that I mentioned. Second project that I'll mention again very briefly is around technology we developed at Princeton called flash nanoprecipitation. That is a sustainable approach to allow us to make polymer colloids or polymer nanoparticles in a very rapid process. This work here was actually sponsored by BASF, and you may ask why BASF would be interested in sponsoring this type of research. At the time, they had interest in using this kind of technology to make particles of beta-carotene that would actually be used in fish farms. A decade ago, it has tremendous amounts of benefits, some of which I just highlight here. And here's the really interesting point about it. If you look here at these images of what our flash nanoprecipitation systems look like, now you fast forward to the pandemic, these are what the processes look like that led to the formation of the COVID vaccine. In order to make the lipid bilayer nanoparticles, they used the centrally confined impingement jet technology, what we had developed at Princeton. And it was almost a case in point where companies like Moderna and Pfizer was going to have to license the technology we had developed at Princeton, except for the fact that our patents did not include the use of lipids to stabilize these particles. We were using block copolymers and other components. But you can see here that this technology has already been proven to be commercially viable on a worldwide scale. So, I alluded to the fact that my research is primarily experimental. We begin to do simulations. We've shown from a very fundamental standpoint what happens in terms of how we make these particles, utilizing this flash nanoprecipitation process, what's the role of mixing and making these particles, and we've shown that we can make very simple particles to making very complex particles. And here's where Chanel, and i.e. Chanel, the fashion house conglomerate, began to sponsor research in my lab. Chanel has an incredible business model. The creams that Chanel sell for $400 does not contain $400 of science and ingredients. In fact, I know because we had a project sponsored there and we were trying to develop new ingredients for Chanel. They do contain quite a bit of nanomaterials, surfactants, and whatnot, things that do work very well. So I'm not trying to underline their business model. But Chanel sponsored research in my lab to try and develop nanocolloids based on a polymer called chitosan, which is a sustainable plastic. The project went very well, but at the end, Chanel did not license the technology that we developed because it wanted to move away from chitosan because it is derived from shrimp shell. That research was very important for me, and it led to the creation of my second startup. Greenland is a startup that I co-founded that is developing advanced materials and chemicals to outperform legacy chemicals. It takes shell waste from crustaceans and turns it into a suite of advanced materials for a range of applications. We now have locations in Lake Harbor, Florida, as well as Sarnia, Canada, and employ dozens. How did it start? As I alluded to, we started working on chitosan more than a decade ago in my lab from research sponsored by Chanel. The research gave me the opportunity to learn deep about the process of going from shell to polymer, and gave me the opportunity to undertake specialized research in my lab. It also gave me the opportunity to work with a major industry partner, again in this case, Chanel. As an engineer, I can take courses in entrepreneurship, I can take courses in venture capitalism, and I had access to mentors, etc. And perhaps more importantly, and no surprise, the co-founder and the CEO of Greenland is a Princeton alumni. Me and many others greatly benefited from the ecosystem that Princeton has built, thus helping us to transform our science and technology into commercial enterprises. Now, that is enough about me and no more science. As we went about building this ecosystem, one question that always kept coming back to our mind was, who else gets this opportunity? And that question led directly to what I'm about to describe next. As we expanded the innovation ecosystem at Princeton, we thought carefully about ensuring that our innovation ecosystem was inclusive and that all members of the community could participate. It was important for us to think about this from the beginning because it changed how we thought about everything. In science and technology, we use the word convergence to describe the integration of knowledge across the life sciences, the physical sciences, and engineering. That integration is powerful. It's how breakthroughs in fields like material science, synthetic biology, and bioengineering come about, by dissolving the walls between old disciplines. But there is a second dimension to convergence that gets far less attention, and I think it matters just as much, and that is the human factor. It is not enough to bring disciplines together. We have to ask, how can we leverage the diversity amongst our participants themselves, the people doing the convergence? Innovation is a social process. Therefore, the smart choice should be to involve as much of society as possible. Put these two halves together, disciplinary convergence and human diversity, and I believe we get a genuine framework for problem solving and innovation in the 21st century. Neither half is sufficient alone. Now, why does this have to be structural rather than symbolic? I give 3 reasons. First, talent for innovation is evenly distributed. Access to research, capital, and mentorship is not. This gap is not a talent gap. It is an access gap. And access gaps, by their nature, are solvable by design. Second, programs bolted onto existing systems as an afterthought tend to only reach the people that they already reach in the system. These are important, but the system itself should be more inclusive. Third, and most fundamentally, who gets admitted into these laboratories, who gets the first check from the investor, determines whose ideas ultimately reaches the market. Those are not minor decisions. These are the decisions, in part, that determines whose science gets discovered and whose problems get solved. As universities build their innovation ecosystems, train their students, and support companies of the future, the boldest path is not to treat inclusion as a constraint to be managed or as a box to be checked. It is to recognize inclusion as a core component embedded in the architecture of the system from day one. Inclusive innovation has been a personal commitment of mine. When I served as Princeton's inaugural Vice Dean for Innovation, we embedded those practices into the core of our work. We also created new programs that deliberately embedded inclusive innovation from the beginning. And here I just highlight a few. The START program specifically sought embedded inclusive innovation from the beginning. And here I just highlight a few. The START program specifically sought structural rather than symbolic change. START is part academic funding. We also created the Empower Conference, Princeton's conference celebrating women academic entrepreneurs. Empower spanned the full spectrum of the founder's journey from idea to launch, and was open to all. It was central to our entrepreneurial activity and our main conference. In 22, we also launched the Princeton Alliance for Collaborative Research and Innovation, a partnership that we did with the United Negro College Fund in the US and 5 other historically black colleges and universities in the US. Now, research is the hallmark of the reputation of an American research university. Historically black colleges and universities have served as anchor points for the education of many in the US and are emerging as research powerhouses. Princeton sought what it did best, to create research partnerships with these 5 institutions, to meet them where we know what to do, in genuine research of mutual interest and of mutual benefit. In partnership with the United Negro College Fund, we were able to partner with these 5 research universities and sponsor research between Princeton faculty and faculty at these institutions, where the research was the deciding factor of who got funded and who did not get funded. I'm incredibly proud of this program that we created because it served as an example of what a genuine partnership looks like when universities come together on equal ground, equal footing, and equal respect. I share these 3 to make a structural point. These became part of the core of Princeton innovation. It was what we did, and what we built everything else from. Now, with respect to Africa, I want to name another opportunity that I think can grow the conversation about Black and African science and innovation, and that is the African diaspora. I am an engineer, but I also like to read a lot about history. In 1958, the Congress of Negro Writers and Artists was held in Paris, France, as part of the Pan-African movement, in part to discuss the future of Black culture. Historically, to me, these meetings are fascinating. However, in most instances, the meetings did not include scientists or engineers, at least to the best of my knowledge. I've often thought that that was a missed opportunity to expand the discussion. Today, there needs to be a way to engage the broader African diaspora in innovation and entrepreneurship that benefits both Africa and the diaspora. I know that the Africa World Initiative at Princeton is leading the way in some of these efforts. Here I'd like to highlight 3 opportunities. First, capital. Some remittances may be channeled toward venture capital, innovation funding, long-term infrastructure investment. Diaspora bonds, diaspora-funded investment funds, and structured giving vehicles could redirect even a fraction of this capital towards science, technology, and entrepreneurship. Second, knowledge and talent. There are thousands of African-born scientists, engineers, and founders who have built careers, expertise, and networks abroad at institutions like Princeton and at companies and laboratories around the world. Some of that talent can be capital and the global supply chain, relationships built over generations, which would otherwise take decades to construct from scratch. Here I think there's a genuine Pan-African opportunity, one that does not require waiting for a single government or a single institution, but one that does require intentional strategy. It is part of the continent's own capacity, in my opinion, waiting to be fully engaged. As the future is Africa, the diaspora will certainly be a part of that future. I want to conclude my remarks by speaking briefly to a few trends in policy and science. Regarding the former, as the future unfolds, global trends in science, technology, and innovation policy will impact us all. Here are just a few ways in which I see things unfolding. First, knowledge diffuses across borders faster than at any point in history. The World Intellectual Property Organization's newest global report, drawing on more than 250 years of technology diffusion data, confirms this. But the same report is equally clear that the benefits of this diffusion remains highly concentrated. The report's central policy finding is this: openness to global knowledge is necessary, but not sufficient. What ultimately determines whether a nation benefits is absorptive capacity. Sustained investments in education and research, infrastructure, and institutional quality. All the things that are important in building an innovation ecosystem that's anchored on the university. Second, the entire architecture of innovation policy has been rewritten for artificial intelligence. For decades, the innovation policy in most countries was perhaps. Now, there's a drift. AI is not innovation neutral. It is reshaping the research itself that's being conducted, which fields advance the fastest, and who can participate in it. And third, technology is increasingly being treated not as a neutral free trade good, but as an instrument of national strategy. And I would say the same is true for talent. And as a faculty member who still engages in research, I can say that is true in my home country, and as a dean of the graduate school who's concerned about talent and our ability to attract talent from all parts of the world, I would say the latter is true as well.
These shifts are poised to affect local policy and warrant careful considerations in developing an innovation policy. The question now remains, what science will these policy shifts impact? While I am clearly biased, almost every major sustainable technology at its core is a material science problem. Solar power demands pure silicon, perovskite materials. Electric vehicle batteries depend on lithium chemistry and electrode design. Clean water demands membranes, and sustainable cement requires low-cost carbon binder chemistry. If a nation wants to participate meaningfully in the sustainable economy, it cannot simply purchase these technologies. It needs the underlying material science capabilities. That is precisely the direction in which global innovation is moving. The World Economic Forum recently released its top 10 emerging technologies report just a few weeks ago. The headline finding, 8 of the 10 technologies act deliberately on physical systems, materials, energy infrastructure, and biological processes, rather than software. This is a meaningful shift away from software-centric AI. Some of the important technologies revolve around critical minerals, the use of passive radiative cooling, and new fermentation approaches to create chemistries. I highlight those because here's an interesting point. Much of the minerals the global energy transition needs are here. Much of the biodiversity that this raw platform for biochemistry-based revolution is here. And the climate conditions that some of these emerging technologies were essentially designed for is also here. Therefore, in my view, the opportunities are clearly here. I want to close with a thought about what all this ultimately depends on. Today, the pipeline for curiosity-driven research to world-changing impact runs through the university, not exclusively, but fundamentally. The university is the institution that marks the beginning of the pipeline. The researchers pursuing the questions no one has asked before, the graduate students being trained in methods no one has yet fully mastered, and the discoveries no one can predict. Let me make this concrete with a brief example from my own institution on the topic of AI. John Hopfield joined Princeton as a physics professor in 1964. He followed his curiosity into neuroscience, and in 1982, published a model for how neural networks store and retrieve patterns. In 2024, 60 years after arriving at Princeton, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics as one of the foundational figures of the modern artificial intelligence. No one at Princeton in 1964 could have known what their research would have become. Decades later, Dario Amodei came to Princeton as a graduate student to study biophysics, studying how neurons fire and how signals propagate across neural circuits. He was trained as a scientist. He went on to co-found Anthropic and become its CEO, the makers of Claude, now one of the most powerful and consequential AI companies in the world. Princeton did not train an AI entrepreneur. It trained a scientist. These examples illustrate what patient investment in basic research and deep scientific education produces. Outcomes no one could have planned for, no one could have manufactured. Princeton did not expect to be central to the AI story. It happened by simply supporting curiosity-driven research, and that is how it and other universities will ensure that they are part of the technology revolution for the future. Invest in basic research, train scientists deeply, create the structure and the culture, and then help to build the future. Thank you all for your time and attention, and I'm grateful to have been with you tonight. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. When Prof. Rodney and I spoke about how we should divide the time, he said, "Are you sure you want to give me that amount of time? I'm a professor, I'm passionate, I can talk forever." I should have believed him. So now that Prof. Priestley has given us insights into innovation ecosystems found in the States, I would like to bring us back home so we can have a closer look at our own innovation ecosystems and the lessons we can learn to ensure that existing strengths and pockets of excellence are enhanced and adopted more broadly, and to ensure that we build a more inclusive and nationally representative innovation ecosystem. Because South Africa continues to face critical barriers to translating research into commercial success. I would like for us to briefly take a look at the story of a well-known, almost success story of South Africa's electric vehicle, the Joule, and what it may tell us about the journey of technologies in the country. Sorry, something. Okay. In 2005, a new startup, Optimal Energy, emerged with the aim of developing a South African electric vehicle. After 18 months of consideration, the Innovation Fund approved an initial 3-year, 15 million rand investment to create a prototype EV. Importantly, Optimal Energy's mission was not to just build an EV prototype. Rather, it was envisioned that it would create a South African EV industry with global exports. This scope required that the prototype would eventually be produced at viable market cost, meet all road safety requirements, and have support for distribution and sales. Optimal Energy's progress on the prototype, what would become the Joule EV, led to the IDC purchasing a significant stake in Optimal Energy in 2007 to assist in commercialization activities. By late 2008, the first generation prototype Joule EV was unveiled and was well received at the 2008 Paris Auto Show. Further refinements were highlighted in a second generation prototype. At the 2010 Geneva Motor Show, and by early 2011, 4 roadworthy third generation Joule EV prototypes were being tested. That point had been achieved through several partnerships with Optimal Energy and a 250 million rand investment. Further significant investment was required, however, to establish a 50,000 vehicle a year production and distribution network, the scale deemed necessary for successful commercialization. One of the founders of Optimal Energy has said that several factors associated with the South African innovation chasm combined to prevent Optimal Energy from securing the estimated 9.5 billion rand in funding needed. In June 2012, Optimal Energy was liquidated. Optimal Energy's relatively linear journey to establish a South African EV industry has led to a narrative that the small number of Joule EV prototypes fell into the innovation chasm, or the so-called valley of death. This occurs when the process of development offers no bridge for a potential product to move from the exploration of new technology to exploitation or small-scale commercial production. The founders of Optimal Energy apply the innovation chasm concept, arguing that the South African government needs to do more to develop its domestic manufacturing abilities. And they contend that the innovation chasm is an area of limited South African innovation activity outside large corporations and the defense or aerospace industry, where greater system engineering skills could be used. Oh, I'll be back now. However, the innovation chasm concept, does not offer much guidance beyond providing a paradigmatic techno-nationalist rally for change and greater commercialization of domestic technologies. The founders of Optimal Energy identify a disjuncture between TIA and IDC. Alignment of those two departments, funding of the next phase of the South African EVs industry development was critical to securing international investment and startup loans. That lack of alignment is attributed by the founders to being the cause of Optimal Energy's death in the innovation chasm. Now, it's interesting to contrast Optimal Energy's Jules journey with that of Tesla's Roadster, given that there was some overlap in the times at which the two EVs were being developed. In 2003, Tesla was established to manufacture EVs for a mass market. 3 years later, in July 2006, it unveiled its first prototype, the Tesla Roadster. While the Joule and Roadster shared innovative battery cooling technologies, Optimal Energy preceded Tesla with its horizontal battery installation. There were differences too in target markets. The Roadster was a niche sports car focused on performance and ride experience, while from the outset, the Joule sought to be a mass-market everyday commuter. 7 years after it was established, Tesla had managed to produce 1,000 Roadsters with a total investment of $185 million. Starting a year later, 7 years after launch, Optimal Energy had managed to produce 4 Joule prototypes from an equivalent dollar investment of $33 million. Having established production capabilities for the Roadster, in 2008 and 2009, Tesla secured funding to manufacture its second vehicle, the Model S. The first Model S was ready for retail delivery 20 months later in June 2012, with Tesla having secured a former Toyota Northern California production facility in 2010. Perkins and Merman, in their analysis of the Tesla experience, conclude that other companies could develop a niche luxury EV from scratch in 3 to 5 years, with an investment between $1 to $2 billion. Interestingly, these estimated costs are in line with the $1.4 billion or the 9.5 billion rands that Optimal Energy believed was necessary to produce the Joule EV at scale. Successful commercialization of a technology is fraught with challenges, particularly ones like Optimal Energy's envisioned reshaping of the automobile industry. Thies describes Tesla, and by implication, Optimal Energy, as facing deep uncertainty in its undertakings. In this context, uncertainty involves unknown and unknowable risks, which makes predictions fraught, but a structured approach such as the dynamic capabilities framework can assist management when uncertainty is pervasive. Thies further contends Tesla developed strong dynamic capabilities that allowed it to realize the commercialization envisioned for its products. The extent to which a lack of dynamic capabilities contributed to Optimal Energy's failure to realize commercialization is not clear. However, it is important to realize the supportive institutional environment that Tesla operated in. As an American firm, it had the benefit of a large consumer market with associated sales to cover the costs of research and development, and a deep capital market from which to raise finance. Furthermore, Tesla emerged from Silicon Valley, an area with renowned venture capital resources and a leading information technology cluster. In addition, Tesla was a direct beneficiary of the US Department of Energy's large-scale loan funding scheme, which was designed to facilitate the commercialization of this type of disruptive, environmentally impactful technology. Significantly, federal legislative efforts to promote alternative fuel and fuel economy began decades before Tesla, included the 1976 electric and hybrid vehicle research development. Although Optimal Energy and Tesla originated around the same time and faced deep uncertainties, their technologies' journeys occurred in very different environments. Even a brief comparison of these two experiences highlights the multitude of factors that can influence the success or failure of a technology's commercialization. The innovation chasm paradigm, however, reduces these complex and multi-dimensional factors to a linear, technology-orientated, supply-focused narrative. To limit the story of its journey to the innovation chasm is to ignore the critical questions around the adequacy of management's dynamic capabilities, the consistency of state support for technology commercialization through various departments, policies, and incentives, the quality of the innovation ecosystem that the company is embedded in, and the capacity of South Africa's technology finance system. And now, although I have made this comparison, it would be amiss of me to not talk about the different socio-economic conditions of an innovation ecosystem in a developed, high-income country, and one that has to contend with resource constraints, a large marginalized population, high unemployment, but a potentially large informal sector, compact public infrastructure, inadequate technical skills, and modest education levels. Most socio-technical systems fail to grapple with development challenges in the global south and to address unmet needs in an inclusive, systemic, and sustainable way. STI policies based on the innovation system perspective have given priority to economic growth and competitiveness, leaving socio-economic goals as a matter of economic externalities and government regulations. Consequently, inequality, poverty, and exclusion have been exacerbated, impacting populations with lower purchasing power. There has therefore been a call for reviewing innovation policy and considering the transformation of innovation systems and the insertion of innovation in development paths, so they are more appropriate for the specific context of developing countries. Empirical evidence has revealed countless of social exclusion related to the fulfillment of the mainstream innovation system function. In the pharmaceutical industry, for example, certain characteristics of pharmaceutical products, such as high cost, possibility of access, design, development process, lead to exclusion. Furthermore, certain populations may be excluded due to location or education levels. So the argument is that ensuring inclusivity is contingent upon the configuration of the innovation system. The circumstances under which certain innovative goods and services are produced instead of others have an influence on the possible emergence of innovation systems angled towards inclusion. I want us to take a look at a great example of a small but inclusive innovation system with a university as a catalyst for the innovation that fosters urban regional industrialization. Tshwane University of Technology acts as a catalyst within the Gauteng innovation ecosystem, specifically promoting urban regional industrialization in Pretoria and the broader Tshwane municipality. As a University of Technology, TUT shifts the traditional academic mandate towards inclusive innovation by co-creating STI solutions with and for marginalized communities, rather than focusing solely on commercializing high-end corporate patents. So how does TUT drive regional industrialization? TUT bridges the gap between grassroots townships like Soshanguve and Mamelodi and the more industrialized urban core of Tshwane, which is home to major automotive and manufacturing hubs. Firstly, TUT has established special nodes and technology stations. The university hosts dedicated technology stations funded via TIA, such as the Technology Station in Electronics and Chemicals. These act as physical, open access hubs where informal businesses and SMMEs can access advanced industrial equipment. Secondly, TUT co-creates with grassroots innovators through inclusive R&D. Instead of isolated lab research, the university utilizes a living lab methodology where engineers, researchers, and students collaborate directly with local township entrepreneurs to to adapt modern STI inputs like automation, digital tools, and green chemistry to informal manufacturing constraints. Thirdly, it assists with industrial upscaling and standards compliance through bridging the formal-informal divide. The university uses its technical expertise to help local manufacturers lift their products to commercial standards, like achieving SABS compliance. This allows small-scale township enterprises to supply components to major regional supply chains, such as the local automotive assembly sector. And fourthly, TUT ensures integration into regional policy by aligning these outputs with the Gauteng Innovation Strategy that explicitly recognizes the importance of socially oriented innovations, as well as the National Department of Science and Innovation's Decadal Plan. By doing so, they ensure public procurement budgets are rooted towards these formalized, inclusive industrial clusters. Now, to have a better understanding of how this innovation ecosystem drives inclusive innovation and impacts someone from the township, I'll walk you through a case study of Nzimande, an informal entrepreneur from Soshanguve. Nzimande noticed that local township salons and car washes use large amounts of specialized, eco-friendly liquid soaps and degreasers, but they have to buy them at high prices from mainstream retail urban cores. She wants to manufacture a high-quality, localized, affordable, biodegradable cleaning line, but only has a basic backyard bucket mixing setup. This is how her journey through TUT's technology station in chemicals, based at the Garankuwa campus, unfolds. Firstly, there's the intake, needs analysis, and subsidy screening. Nzimande walks into TUT technology station with a basic mixture sample. A dedicated station manager conducts a technology audit. Because Nzimande is an informal township entrepreneur, the station registers her as an SMME client and links her project to a TIA seed fund subsidy, covering most of her upcoming technical costs. Secondly, formula development and reverse engineering. Nzimande's backyard mixture separates on the shelf and lacks consistency. So TUT chemical scientists and advanced students take her sample into the university labs. Using emulsion technology, they reverse engineer and refine the formulation, improving shelf life, stabilizing active ingredients, and ensuring the product is genuinely biodegradable. Thirdly, quality testing and safety certification. To sell formally, Nzimande needs to prove her product is safe. The station runs product evaluation and quality tests in accordance with SABS. They compile the mandatory material safety data sheets and toxicological profiles that major corporate retailers or municipal buyers legally require before purchasing. Number 4, there's low volume manufacturing and scaling up. Nzimande doesn't own industrial machinery. The TUT station opens its factory floor to her for low volume contract manufacturing. Under the supervision of university technicians, Nzimande uses the station's automated batch mixers, fillers, and flushes to produce her first commercial run of 2,000 liters, avoiding massive early capital expenditure. And lastly, skills transfer and business integration. While her product is being bottled, Nzimande attends the station's specialized short courses on detergent technology and quality management systems. Concurrently, TUT connects her to the Center for Entrepreneurship Development to assist her with formal company registration, tax compliance, and commercial branding. By the end of this cycle, the innovation ecosystem has completely reshaped Nzimande's path. The inclusivity win is that Nzimande transitions from an informal, survivalist backyard mixer to a legally compliant, technically trained business owner. Wealth and manufacturing capacity are retained directly within Soshanguve. The regional industrialization win is that local township, car washers, and metropolitan businesses now source their chemical products from a local distributor, shortening the regional supply chain and reducing carbon footprint. And the university catalyst, TUT students gained direct, real-world case experience during the formula testing phase, ensuring their academic studies directly answer South Africa's macroeconomic needs. Through effective public-private partnerships, this example and many others can be amplified and implemented on a large scale across the country. To conclude, the success of an innovation system should be measured primarily by its impact on the economic, social, governance, and left behind the capacities that are built and supported, the refinement of the value chain from scientific research through to commercialization, the networks and partnerships built, the ability not only to invent, but also to adopt and adapt, are all fundamental to improving a system that serves the core objective of improving the human condition. Thank you.
I'd like to thank both Prof. Rodney and Ms. Zamanzima Mazibugo Mabena for such riveting and informative presentations. We will be taking a slight 5-minute body break, so if everyone could please be back by 19:45 for the Minister's address. Thank you.
And the leadership generally of the Science, Technology and Innovation Business Forum, led by Mr. Tilson Manyoni. My special advisor, Ngaba Ngandela, and let me also greet my fellow speakers for tonight who have come before me. Professor Rodney, thank you very much for an unbelievable presentation, actually. I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels like that. Zamanzima Mapena, your presentation has helped me to understand more about technology stations. A great presentation. I was asking you, where is Zinhle now? And her product. Then you said, no, it's a fictitious. But then I said, it's fictitious because it's real at the same time, that it's somewhere where it's actually taking place. Let me greet my co-chairpersons of the Portfolio Committee in the National Assembly and chairperson of the Select Committee in the National Council of Provinces and other distinguished members of Parliament who are here. Thanks for your attendance. This is not a trap, because you ask us tough questions. We are not going to run away from the questions by saying, but you were there, Chairperson. Well, why are you asking me? You were there. Instead, why don't you tell your other colleagues who were not there as to actually what happened there? But we honestly appreciate your attendance. Heads of our science and academic institutions, other senior government officials who are here, leaders and captains of industry and entrepreneurs. And I do need to especially congratulate you for this initiative that you are taking to get business. In fact, this may be very historic, to get business to organize itself around science, technology, and innovation. It will make me sleep better. Because when I also listen to all the things that have been said tonight, it strikes me that as South Africa, we've got all these elements that were being spoken about tonight. Even elements of the Princeton University experience, as shown also by what TUT is trying to do. But they are not aligned. That's the big challenge, and that's the big task in your hand. How do we align this? I would really love that maybe you have, not this size, a smaller size gathering in a workshop representing all the key stakeholders who are here, to come together and say, right from the early days as you start this, what do you think needs to be done to get our science system, science and innovation system together? That is very important. And what lessons, of course, can we learn from our own experiences, but also from experiences from a prestigious institution like Princeton University. Let me also greet then all distinguished guests who are here and members of the media, including the Mail and Guardian. I was saying that to the CEO, I'm looking forward that we work together around this project. Because my sense now from my experience is that sometimes Well, tensions between political people and the media will always be there. They are not negative. They are healthy. But sometimes the relationship goes into difficulties because there also isn't something that we are trying to do together without collapsing each one's role into the other. There's a kind of a relationship that we need to build with the Mail and Guardian. I hope and I wish that it be so. Thanks for inviting me to address this important gathering. Let me commend the Business Forum for this visionary initiative and for choosing the timely theme of a science-centered public-private partnership model for science and innovation. The lecture that was given here, or the lectures from Princeton University and also by Ms. Mabena. Thank you very much for this. That's why you were right that I shouldn't be giving a lecture. I should just be giving remarks. Because there was no ways I was actually going to catch up with the standard that has been set here. And Chairperson Manyoni, you would have jeopardized your own possibility of having a great relationship with a minister because you don't embarrass ministers. So you must give me my own space where I can shine because I'm not competing with anybody in that space. I'm not giving a lecture, I'm giving remarks. Now, this lecture is especially significant because it comes 1 month after the inaugural policy dialogue on industrialization through innovation, which we co-hosted with the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, whose main objective was to strengthen the link between innovation and industrialization. If I were to summarize what I'm going to say in one sentence, it would be this, which is the challenge that we have as a country. You cannot industrialize without innovation. Similarly, you cannot innovate without industry. I don't know whether I'm making sense. The two things are deeply, deeply interconnected. That's what the presentations that were made here actually illustrated. Also, this lecture follows the launch of our country's inaugural edition of National Science Month, which we launched last week at the Valley University of Technology. I met the Vice Chancellor now, DG. He's very happy that we took the launch to VUT. And also comes just 3 weeks before the 9th annual Southern African Development Community Industrialization Week. Some of you may know, we will be hosting this, by the way, in Durban from the 27th through the 31st of July. South Africa is interim chairperson of SADC this year, and there is a summit which we are hosting in August. We are interim chair because Madagascar had a coup, so they couldn't continue chairing. And then next year, we are the incoming chair of SADC, which means we're going to be chairing for 2 years, which is a huge task for us. But drawing from your chosen theme, I wish to reflect on several issues which deserve consideration by a gathering of this nature. Why does a science-centered partnership model matter? This question has been answered, by the way, by our guests who were giving lectures here. I just want to highlight a few things. It's generally accepted among scientists, public policy makers, and leaders of industry that in the 21st century, scientific advancement and technological innovation are the main drivers of industrialization, including creation of new industries, as well as inclusive growth. And I like this emphasis from these lectures about inclusivity. There is no more important a concept in South Africa than inclusivity, given the history of our country and where we want to go. Inclusivity, by the way, is in terms of race, is in terms of gender, is in terms of socio-economic status, hence the importance of promoting grassroots innovation, as well as persons with disabilities, which is a section of our population we tend not to talk much about. And in fact, statistics indicate they constitute between 4 and 6% of our population. That's not a small percentage, so that no one is left outside. The test, Bab Manyoni, of what we are doing, one major test would be its inclusivity. Also, we talk about inclusive growth, because not all forms of growth are necessarily or inherently inclusive. I can give lots of examples about our own South African history. The 1960s are regarded as the golden age of South African industry, or South African capitalism, if you want to use that term. But only the minority benefited. In fact, the growth rate was estimated at something between 8 and 10% on average during that 10-year period. But it was a period also that came on the back of the arrest of Mandela and them in Rivonia, and what the apartheid government thought was the complete destruction of the liberation movement, which laid the basis for that growth. So growth in itself is not necessarily inclusive. It benefited the minority of the population whose legacy we are still dealing with today. So I really like this whole thing of inclusive growth. The idea also of open science. Science knows no boundaries. And the whole issue of inclusive scientific practice. We are not saying when we say that we mustn't have top scientists who are specialists, no. But we also have got a task of making our population to understand the importance of science, and that is why we are having this Science Month. As a country, we are still confronting entrenched and complex development challenges. And therefore, for us, the strategic use of science, technology, and innovation is no longer optional. It is an economic and developmental imperative. It's absolute necessity. At the same time, private sector research, driven solely by commercial interests, may not adequately address the developmental priorities and public good objectives central to South Africa's socio-economic context. We must make these things to talk to each other. A science-centered public-private partnership model is therefore essential to bridge this gap. Such a model should align public oversight and academic rigor with private sector capital, commercialization capability, and agility. Most importantly, it should place scientific research at the center of national development. The current research landscape shows why this shift is necessary. My lesson, is what now? Is my 7th year as Minister of Science. What I have learned over the last 7 years is that without these key role players, academia, research institutions, industry, and government working together and creating an ecosystem, we will not be able to work together. One of the things I've given the National Advisory Council on Innovation, the task, is to say it's clear to me that one component that we are missing in our ecosystem is science parks. It's science parks. I've had a very good discussion with Sasol. I'm visiting them, my last Science Month activity on the 31st of July, to say, how can we build a science park at Sasol? By the way, it's very interesting. Zama, you were talking about the Jules, our electric car that was never be. But also our other innovation was Sasol, albeit under apartheid. Because of sanctions, apartheid and our scientists came up with extracting oil from coal. It's a unique South African technology. We are indeed, I agree, a very talented nation. And also we've got brilliant scientists in our country. Yes, I do take what was said earlier, I can't remember by who, that we are not going to change things from the past, but we must seek to shape the future and change the future. I agree with that. But also it's going to be important to learn from the past if we are to truly do what we want to do. You know, I was looking at the dates. I have a hypothesis about Jules as to what happened. I'm not going to tell the whole story of my suspicions. In my early days as Minister of Science, I asked this in the department. Where are the researchers who were part of developing our electric vehicle? 6 of them work for Tesla. And 1 of them works for Jaguar and was responsible for designing the F-type Jaguar. Now, you can see where my suspicion is. Actually, that Tesla may as well be a South African-born project, not because of the owner. Not because of the owner. Well, we political people sometimes, we can be very conspiratorial. Because part of this, I ask myself an uncomfortable question. Is there no relationship between the collapse of our electric vehicle and the rise of Tesla? Now, I was talking to the CEO briefly of the Human Sciences Research Council. I see she's gone now. I know that she has got little kids. Not so little, but anyway. I said, when I'm listening to our guests from Princeton University, we do need to write the history of science in South Africa, including the history of the Jules, our electric vehicle. What happened? I remember I was sitting in Parliament when Minister Pando, who was Minister of Science then, was like lamenting and crying and say, we can't raise these billions of rands to actually launch our vehicle. It won international awards in major competitions in the world, but we still lost it. What happened? Because we do need to learn lessons, not to be conspiratorial like me, but to learn positive lessons out of that. Universities and science councils, as we've been told, produce world-class foundational science. But too many promising discoveries remain trapped between laboratory scale research and commercial application. Private enterprises, driven by market demand and shareholder expectations, are often sometimes hesitant to fund early-stage, high-risk scientific research. I'm sure business people who are listening today, they can see that being hesitant is not necessary, that we need to be bold. That is what your initiative, Babu Manyon, is. You are being bold. We are providing a platform for business to partner with science, with academia, to produce new innovations. I went to the United States. I'm not very keen to go there right now. I went to the United States, when was it? When I visited the National Institutes of Health, which is the biggest health research facility in the whole world. It's just outside Washington, D.C., for those who know the United States. The acting head at the time of that National Institutes decided to put aside his time to come and welcome me as Minister of Science from South Africa. And he says in the meeting, I just said I'll put aside everything because you were the ones who discovered the first variant of COVID-19. He says, we wanted to stop aeroplanes from South Africa from flying to the United States because we said that was South African COVID-19. And we must not allow South Africans to travel there. He said, had we followed that to the letter, so many more Americans would have died. Because of your scientists, we saved lots of American lives. I want to say two things to you. Thank you very much for your scientists in South Africa. Number two, please tell your president that as American scientists, we apologize for having demonized you, for having discovered the first variant of COVID-19. I'm raising this because I want to underline this, that we are such a talented nation. And we also practice first-class science. We have the single largest public science system in the African continent. We've got the single largest public university system in the African continent. Right, not very far from here, I can't point whether it's this side or that side. I'm new in Pretoria. And the problem, I don't drive myself. So I don't understand Pretoria. But right here, in Tshwane, we've got at Steve... No, we are not in Tshwane, we're in Kempton Park, okay. My apologies. I stay in Tshwane, my apologies. I know that's a serious mistake. We are here in the land of science, technology, and innovation, which is a Uruleni municipality. I've lost my point. That's age. I'll come back to it. Now, the second issue that perhaps I want to raise, I was talking about the Steve Biko Nuclear Medicine Research Initiative, which we call NUMERI. We are using nuclear isotopes at Steve Biko Hospital to diagnose and treat cancer, amongst other diseases. What we have managed to do through that is that if you go and do, what is this called to treat cancer? Chemotherapy. Chemotherapy, when it treats a cancer cell, it doesn't hit directly at the cell. It treats all around it, plus including where the cell is. Nuclear medicine goes straight to the cancer cell. Doesn't go all over the place. Hence, sometimes the side effects of chemotherapy. It's the only facility of its kind in the African continent. We are using our nuclear resources to produce these nuclear isotopes. I was told that some people from the United States visited there. It wasn't clear what they wanted. I might have my own suspicions. They thought maybe we are wanting to go back to produce a nuclear bomb again. We'll never do that again. We went past that. Now, core elements of a science-centered public-private partnership model. The model must deliberately strengthen the synergy between government, academia, and industry. I can't emphasize that more. That paradigm also must be characterized by a research agenda that must be co-designed. Princeton, wonderful example. Even the TUT, we need to co-design the research agenda so that we get the kinds of products that are going to be of benefit to everybody. Strategic infrastructure also should be shared. That is very important. And agile intellectual property arrangements should be created. Business people understand this even better when one is talking about agility. The model should also recognize that innovation is a continuous rather than a linear process. A professor from Princeton said it nicely that he drew that diagram with arrows, and he said, it doesn't always look as smooth as it appears here. That's very important, because this is a very complex and a living process. So the issue of agility and coordination. The next matter I just want to briefly, so the macro scale behind Princeton University, as you were illustrating. Like Zinhle to think of coming up with a different kind of detergent that's going to be more effective, less dangerous on hands, and all that. Science, simply put, is seeking solutions to problems that face humanity. That's what it is. Although it is not always used for that. There's another thing that we need to be careful about. AI, artificial intelligence, tracing your enemies, using that. Our science that we must seek to build as South Africa must be in line with our own history and commitment to justice and social equality. We must advance science for social justice and science for inclusive growth and development. Lots of issues that we've got to solve, problems, energy problems that we are facing now, they require science. That's why we are doing a lot of work on the hydrogen economy, research into hydrogen economy. Health and vaccine sovereignty. I like the emphasis on sovereignty because sovereignty does not mean we are a country that doesn't have relations, but you must seek to build independent capacity on things that are important for the development of your own country. That's why the African Union has said by 2040, 60% of the vaccines needed in Africa, in the continent, must be produced in the continent. We have started, by the way, doing that as South Africa. What is our latest innovation? Is the oral vaccine for cholera. It's the first vaccine that is oral. Thanks for liberating men who are very scared of injections. All men are scared of injections. I've noticed that, myself included. This is our latest innovation that we are going to be testing now in South Africa. Climate change and the environment. It's a big thing. We mustn't listen to some people who happen to lead very powerful countries who tell us that they only use common sense to run a big country. How can you use common sense to run a country when there is science? In other words, you are saying science doesn't matter. So it's so nice to see someone like our professor here who comes from a big country who says science is important. That's an important counter voice. I'm sorry, you know who else I'm talking about. It's a necessary counter voice. In fact, I'm glad to hear you, Prof, talking like we are talking now. Because to weaken the American science system is to weaken the global science system. So much innovation comes from the United States, and on projects also supported by the United States in terms of research. To kill that is to place humanity in extreme danger. I'm willing to concede that, at least, about the importance of science from the United States. Now, as I move towards ending, I just want to say this. Baba Manyon, we've got so many innovations that we are supporting as the Department of Science, Technology, and Innovation. But our single biggest problem is scaling up. I can tell you now that Zinhle is possibly faced with that problem of scaling up the production of that detergent. Now, we cannot scale up without industry. So we have no choice other than to work together. If we don't work together, we work separately, we will die actually separately. We'll continue as government sponsoring only research for publications. And industry won't grow, won't innovate, won't be competitive. I can guarantee you that without innovation, without investment into innovation. Also, as I say, we must promote grassroots innovation. We must promote science at the higher end, but also there's grassroots innovations. I bumped across a gentleman at OR Tambo Airport. He says, "Oh, Minister, how are you?" I said, "I'm fine." He says, "Oh, thank you very much for supporting us." Now, I know we are supporting many things. I don't say, "By the way, what are you talking about?" I say, "Oh, yes. Because you must take the credit, you know. Fortunately, it decides to explain what it is, you see. He says they are experimenting because we are a water-scarce country of ablution systems that do not use water but use air, more or less like what happens in the aeroplane. If you go to the bathroom in the aeroplane, it uses more air than water. They are experimenting with a new technology, supported by TIA, by the way, our Technology Innovation Agency. So we recognize, we see you, some say that we see you. So the issue of scaling up is a big issue. Lastly, what are the critical enablers now that we need coming out of here? This has been such a rich evening. I'm sorry we are going later than we had planned, Chair. But it was such a rich evening. To me, it's almost as good as my dinner. Because it's been so rich and it has set the agenda for us loud and clear. All what I would like you to do is to say what lessons are we supposed to learn and what are we supposed to do. In terms of what are we supposed to do, please bring those ideas to me as well, as a minister, to say in your policy work, because I'm a policy maker. Sometimes I get reminded, Minister, don't be above yourself. We are not a scientist, we are a science policy maker. I accept that, although I always dispute it. Because my advisor seems to think we are only a scientist if we are a natural scientist. I am a social scientist as well. And you heard here, because the one important message that came out through the presentations, it ain't science unless it is multidisciplinary. That was another main message that came from here. It ain't science unless it is multidisciplinary. That's the kind of science that I would wish that you also are able to advance. What we are doing today, I have no doubt, will go down in history as having been the beginning of new levels of science, technology, and innovation in the Republic of South Africa. Also, a country that has got certain strange features sometimes. It's good we are doing this because it tells a different story. That South Africa is not just a country of senior police generals who are peddling drugs, as the Madlanga Commission is telling us every day. Shocking. It's good though we are getting to the bottom of the problems, because we are a great country. We're a country of science. We're a country of development. We're a country striving for inclusive growth. This is a nice contrast. You know, from the depression of watching the Madlanga Commission, I don't have time to watch it, by the way. I sometimes look at snippets late at night to say, that's not the totality of South Africa we have. This is another South Africa that wants movement forward through science, technology, and innovation. I wish you the best.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister Professor Blade Nzimande, for your wonderful remarks, and not lecture, remarks, emphasis. We will now be moving on to the next session, which will be the industry voices. We are running on a tight schedule, so please can all the guest speakers keep it to 5 to 7 minutes each. I'd like to start off by welcoming our first guest speaker, Dr. Stravos Nicolaou, who is a Group Senior Executive, Strategic Trade, Aspen Pharmacare Holdings, and is also a BRICS Business Council member.
Thanks very much for that most generous introduction. I must say it's a very difficult act following the minister. However, I'm going to give it a good go, Minister. And let me start off by saying that people are often dubious when they hear from farmer people, but I have a very simple scientific theory around farmer. And it cuts at the cross-section between science and economics. So we grapple with all these economists all day long about whether the economy is in decline or whether it is growing. So just ask me, a simple farmer guy, what the answer is to that. I'll tell you that if I'm selling more antidepressants, the time I know the economy is in decline. Okay? However, if I sell more of those little blue pills, I know the economy is growing. Okay, now, I've said this in jest. However, there is a theme I wish to follow today. Minister said that innovation and industrialization are interconnected, interchangeable. I want to add another dimension to that. And that is in the context of our country, because we need to play to our strengths. There's a great interconnectivity between innovation, industrialization, and manufacturing as well. So I'm adding the manufacturing leg to that. And it is that aspect I want to embellish a little on today. So in the 6 or 7 minutes, the reduced 6 or 7 minutes I have at my disposal, I'm going to cover 2 parts. The first is, can we successfully innovate in the pharmaceutical industry in our country? Remembering that pharma has been identified as a priority sector, both for industrialization and also for economic growth. You can go and look this up, it's in the industrial policy framework. Can we succeed, and how do we succeed? And the second thing is, speaking to today's thematic, and let me also commend Tilson for putting this together. I know it's a massive effort. And Tilson, I think if we have half your energy, we will execute on the second part I'm going to discuss, which is a very simple 4-point plan on how we innovate, industrialize, and manufacture in the pharma sector. And I'm using pharma today because it is one of the most innovative industries the world over. So let me cover very quickly the first part. I come, as you heard, from an organization called Aspen Pharmacare, which is a 27-year-old organization. We're fairly young. And in those 27 years, we started in a 2-bedroom apartment in Durban. The main bedroom was marketing and sales, and the smaller second bedroom was where finance and admin was held. And the lounge and dining room, which are quite small, doubled up as the meeting room for sales reps. So that's where we started. And today we're an organization that is the largest pharma company on the African continent, in the southern hemisphere. And we are world leaders in general anesthesia, muscle blockers, and occupy position 2 in injectable thrombosis. Now these are all complex technologies. So I'm saying this not because I'm here to brag or to be glib or be brazen about anything. I'm saying this because if we are smart and put our minds to it, even with the great constraints we have in our country, we can succeed. And I had the privilege of addressing the health and finance ministers of SADC on Thursday in Harare. And I said the same thing to them, because there's this whole thing of we suffer from our own dose of Afro-pessimism. And it's important to keep reminding, particularly ourselves, that when we put our minds to it, we are a formidable scientific country. Okay. Aside from what the minister said around being the first to discover the beta variant, and then we did the Omicron variant as well. And because I'm of Greek origin, these variants are all named after the Greek alphabet. And I said, thank goodness it only goes up to 22. Otherwise, South Africa would have discovered 12 of the 22, Minister. So it was a good thing that it stops at 22. But there was a serious story behind that. And the serious story is when we put our minds to it, we can succeed. And I've just given you Aspen as a demonstration of that. We are working on many other things, including vaccines, including manufacturing the GLP-1 weight loss drugs, generics of those. So I think we can safely say that against the odds, South Africa has turned itself into a pharmaceutical scientific jurisdiction against the odds, because we are always and have been known to be a mining, commodities, geography, perhaps financial services. Those have been our strengths, and we are bucking the trend. And again, it is possible to buck the trend. Now let me quickly pivot to why I've linked innovation, industrialization, and manufacturing. When we look at manufacturing in our country, in my sector, the public sector, and I've lamented this to the Minister on many an occasion, and he understands this, he gets this. But it's not entirely in his hands, and I hope it will be shortly. But 70% plus of the volume of pharmaceuticals in our country are procured in the public sector. Okay. So we have missed a massive opportunity to leverage public sector volumes to create domestic competitiveness and export orientation. And that means that the line ministry and department that does the procurement has to follow preferential procurement policies in our country. They are there for a good reason, and they need to be followed. That will give a tremendous opportunity for us to turn into an export orientation. So, point one of this 4-point plan is we have to implement public procurement smartly. That in itself will allow black industrialists to leverage off-take agreements, because when a black industrialist in my sector goes to a commercial bank or even a DFR, so I've got a great plan, I need 50 million rand, 20 million, whatever it is, the number. They say, no, it's wonderful, you've got a great concept, but give us some collateral and then we'll borrow the money. Where are you going to get the collateral from? So, Minister, this thing of 3-year tenders that are heavily biased towards importers is undermining black industrialists in our country. Point number 2, and again I am linking innovation, industrialization, manufacturing, is that charity starts in your own backyard, at home. It's disappointing to see the market penetration we have in Africa from a farmer perspective, partly because we are dependent on overseas agencies like the WHO pre-qualification to approve our own products in our own continent. How can that be? So all I'm saying is we've got a regulator in South Africa called SAPRA, which granted is undercapacitated, but it is a reputable regulator of medicines. Are we saying that if you are fine with registering a product and administering it to a South African patient, it's going to be different when you use it in a patient in Burundi or Rwanda? The answer is, of course, it's not going to be. So we need, with speed and swiftness, to implement mutual recognition and harmonization across the continent. And if you are going to stick to WHO pre-qualification as a prerequisite for all these international procurement agencies buying drugs for Africa, speaking to what the Minister said around Africa's commitment via a Heads of State Bureau resolution, which was passed on 17 May 2022, which called for the continent to procure 60% of its own medicines for its own people by 2040. If we are to be true to that, we need priority review and parallel submissions of WHO PQ. We need to stop talking about it and we need to implement it. And if we cannot get it right, Minister, we have to use our own agencies, our own ML3 agencies on the continent. So that's intervention 2. Intervention 3. It's a very simple 4-point plan. Intervention 3 is that our continent is heavily dependent on procurement by international procurement agencies. So I was very happy that the minister the other day traveled and he met with Gavi. It's very important that the minister did that. So thank you, Minister, for that. Gavi, UNICEF acquire 52% of Africa's vaccines. So the majority, or half, let's say half. Okay. And Africa imports 99% of its vaccines. How can that be? We need reform. These international procurement agencies, their mechanism of procurement needs to be reformed so that they can start procuring from African companies. I can cite the same example, incidentally, with HIV and AIDS. And I'm pleased to tell you, once again, because we were innovative, and it's going to be my 4th point, we were able as Aspen to introduce we pioneered the first generic antiretrovirals on the African continent. We took the prices down from $15,000 per patient per year down to $180. Hundreds of thousands of lives were saved. We did that through licensing, which is also something that the minister spoke about and our dear friend and colleague from Princeton University. But that's going to be my 4th point. I'm coming to that in a second. But let me just finish up on this procurement by international procurement agencies. It is counterintuitive that our continent, sub-Saharan Africa, harbors 69% of the world's HIV infection rate. So the prevalence is the highest of any continent in the world. And yet we import 85% of our antiretrovirals. How can that possibly ever be? It is the most counterintuitive thing that I've heard. And just to underscore and underline that point, during COVID, at the onset of COVID, South Africa was the chair of the African Union, and our President Ramaphosa, immediately became immersed in the COVID pandemic and turning the tide against the odds. One of the things he did right early on, he appointed the ICT mogul, Strive Masiyiwa, as his special envoy for COVID. And Strive set about setting up a pooled procurement platform for Africa, which he did very successfully. And he did so in 12 days. And he phoned me up the one day and he said to me, Stavros, I don't know a lot about your industry. I'm an ICT guy, but just explain something to me. How can it be that you and Stephen Sard, other people, have outsourced 1.4 million patient treatments to Asia and particularly India? How can that be? Why have you not kept it with us? And I said, Strive, I'm embarrassed to tell you that you are right, and I don't have the answer. But one of the answers, just to finish up on this international procurement, is the continent needs itself to set up a pooled procurement mechanism. And if it was done in 12 days by a non-pharma, non-scientific guy, an ICT guy, then surely it is possible today, Minister, that Africa, CDC, and the other agencies do that. So that is intervention, or point number 3. Let me end off with probably the most important point, or one of the most important points in this 4-point plan. So point 4 is we need a fit-for-purpose technology transfer model. Fit for purpose for our country. Without mentioning names or pectoral, it's all well and good. Because we've got, to R&D a new medicine is going to cost you a mere $2 to $3 billion. It's clearly out of the pockets of many of our own companies here. Don't go that deep. So you have to rely on smart ways of doing this. And one of those smart ways is licensing and technology transfer agreements. And we've done this successfully at the onset of HIV, and we did it with TB products. But if you don't have the off-takes, as I was saying earlier, then you're going to close capacities and lose capacities in the country. So we've lost all our penicillin manufacturing capacity in the country. We had 3 manufacturing facilities. We've lost our oral contraceptive manufacturing facilities and others. And unless we reverse this, we will lose other important critical capacities in the country. So at the onset of HIV, we had a good model around voluntary licensing, and these models evolved to voluntary license, technology transfer, manufacturing, and distribution agreements. So let me fast track 20, 25 years on, where you're now having new innovations, and unfortunately we've gone backwards in our model. Our model is one that doesn't favor the African continent. So when we enter into these technology transfer agreements, what do I mean by them being fit for purpose for what we've got in our country? It means that we need, if our licensors and partners are committed, it means that we have to have full technology transfer packages, including the intellectual data. Because if we have to go and restart this from scratch, there's a time delay, and by that time the market is saturated and we cannot compete. So my last and final point number 4, is we need technology transfer arrangements, which is a complex area, and I'm probably not covering it well because it's detailed. But we need, let me just say, a fit-for-purpose technology transfer model that works for the capabilities and capacities of our country. Ladies and gentlemen, to wrap up, all I've tried to do today, I've tried to link innovation with industrialization and linking that to manufacturing, enhance, improve innovation in the sector, and also retain and grow our manufacturing capacity for export and domestic purposes. It's been a wonderful pleasure speaking to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nicolau, for your wonderful reflections. We are, just to remind the guest speakers, that we are running on a bit of a tight program, so please, if reflections can be kept at a minimum of 5 minutes, as we aim to conclude by 9:15. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Sybil Sioka, who's the founder and managing director of Ample Resources, and is also the chairperson of PPS Holdings Trust.
Sure. Is that the light we work with? Yeah, a little bit. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. That light is throwing me off completely. I'm sorry. But I just said good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a privilege to be here, an honor to participate here, and to listen to such great speakers. I'm not going to be reacting to the lectures that and the remarks that have been made. Suffice to say that, in the comments from my colleague Stavros that have been made, suffice to say that I come from the healthcare background. Stavros and I come from that same background, but I deviated from pharma, even though I'm a pharmacist, to medical devices. And somebody was commenting that medical devices are so broad. Yes, they are. We start from your elastoplast, and we go as high as your MRI scan. So it's very broad. Even your isotopes, Minister, they fall under that. As a divide. Throughout my career, I have observed innovation from multiple perspectives and learned a simple truth. Innovation creates value when it improves lives, strengthens institutions, and contributes to sustainable development. This evening, I would like to reflect on how science, technology, and innovation can serve as catalysts. And I'm not going to go into details because most of it has been covered. And I have 5 minutes, and my speech was much longer than that. So I don't know how many slides to cut. But we're having this conversation. This is not simply a discussion about science, technology, and innovation for its own sake. It's a discussion about South Africa's future, competitiveness, economic resilience, and our ability to create opportunities for our young people. At its heart, innovation is about solving real problems. It's about creating value that is shared broadly across society. Progress must translate into meaningful outcomes for communities, businesses, and future generations. I need to move, I'm going to move fast. Okay. So science, technology, and innovation create value when they move beyond ideas and are translated into practical private partnerships. That is my central proposition. Good ideas alone do not transform economies. Research alone does not create prosperity. Innovation delivers impact when knowledge, capital, leadership, and implementation are aligned around a common purpose. Minister, I have a backup of this, but I also have that, because this fails sometimes, this never fails. The innovation pathway, we are all familiar with that. Discovery, capability, industry, and prosperity. I had some notes under that, but I'm not going to go into detail on that one as well. Why public-private partnerships matter? There's no single institution that can afford this alone, what we're trying to achieve here. Government provides policy direction, public investment, and strategic leadership. I hope, Minister, you heard when professors talked about the investment that government makes into innovation, research in particular, and that's what we need. Universities and research institutions generate knowledge, develop talent, and advance scientific discovery, and even go beyond that now from what you said, that they even actually commercialize the research that they make. Industry brings commercialization capability, operational expertise, and market access, and that's what Stavros was talking about, because that's what Aspen is about. Civil society, I've added the fourth part because we've been talking about government, universities, and industry. The fourth part is very important because that is people. That's about people. Civil society ensures that innovation remains connected to societal needs. Shared innovation impact requires all four partners working together within one ecosystem. A model for innovation. I'm going to use healthcare. Not only because I'm a pharmacist, I come from that background, but it is one, I would say, area that provides one of the clearest examples of what effective partnerships can achieve. My career has allowed me to view the healthcare system as a pharmacist, a regulator, entrepreneur, and board member. These experiences have demonstrated how collaboration can improve lives while building national capability. Healthcare innovation improves patient outcomes. It develops specialist skills, strengthens regulatory capability, supports manufacturing capacity, attracts investments, and facilitates technology transfer. And that's why I have actually chosen healthcare. Healthcare shows that innovation can generate both societal impact and economic value. Building our own capability one notable South African example to a government you will recall when we had COVID, we had asked that sovereign capability is not built during a crisis. Remember when we needed these vaccines built through long-term commitment. You spoke about somebody who started building something discovered something in 1964, and only in it's very recent that technology was used in the markets. So a capability is built through long-term commitment, strategic investment, and sustained collaboration. Capability is rarely created by a single institution. It is created through partnerships. The one that is very close to my heart is the MedTech Master Plan. It hasn't produced a product, but it's a plan in the making. The MedTech Master Plan is a prime example of a public-private partnership in action. It brings different partners together around common goals, with each contributing distinct capabilities. The MedTech Master Plan is not only about technology. It is about building an ecosystem where policy, science, industry, and society work together so that the innovation can move from ideas into practical health impact. The COVID-19 pandemic reminded us that capability cannot be imported at the precise moment it is needed. The resilience is built before a crisis and not during one. The decisions we make today will determine our preparedness for tomorrow. Having mentioned the successes that we've had, there is there is an elephant in the room for us in the MedTech, and that we have a challenge with public health debt, Minister. If you owe us, as small companies, as big companies, especially small companies, you will not have innovation. That's why I am saying this is the biggest elephant in the room. When medical technology companies experience delayed payments, the immediate pressure is on cash flow. That reduces resources available for research and development, product improvement, and new technologies. Then regulation as a strategic enabler. I was once a regulator at some stage, and regulation seeks innovators do seek certainty, which regulation provides. Entrepreneurs seek speed. When I was brought in, we had a backlog of registrations of medicines, and that's what I worked on at that time. Investors seek predictability. Effective regulation provides all three while innovation to scale. Regulatory harmonization, which I have put in the slide there, reduces complexity, lowers compliance costs, and supports market access. Examples of that, we have SAPRA that engages with Zazibona, which is Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Namibia. We have harmonized their processes, and SAPRA is engaging with that process. Innovation is not always about breakthrough technologies. Sometimes it begins with recognizing an unmet need and asking how things can be done better. There's a young man in the Eastern Cape that has developed glasses that help previously sighted people that are blind now to see. In Kalafong Hospital, we have a pharmacist that started a Skip the Queue website, because in most of the hospitals here, the queue is always at the pharmacy. SMMEs are often uniquely positioned to do exactly that. The challenge is really a shortage of ideas. The challenge is access. The real test of innovation is not the quality of science. It is whether knowledge reaches society, and we have to strive to do that. I'm skipping now, so I'm going to go to my next slide. On governance, I want to touch on governance and trust. Okay. Oh, I'm one slide. I'm going to skip that. I'm just going to show the slides and go to the to my conclusion. Okay. I had call to action, that's what I was looking for, but I'm not going to say that. If we commit to building partnerships that empower innovators, strengthen SMMEs, develop young talent, and create meaningful impact, South Africa will not merely participate in the future. We will help shape it by combining scientific excellence, effective partnerships, trusted institutions, and a shared commitment to delivery. We can build an innovation ecosystem that creates opportunity, strengthens resilience, and delivers lasting value for all South Africans. Ladies and gentlemen, let us start shaping the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sioka. We will now be moving on to our final speaker, Ms. Lena Miranda, who is the CEO of Linköping Science Park, was the immediate past president for the International Association of Science Parks and Areas of Innovation. Welcome, Ms. Miranda.
Thank you very much, and I feel like I'm standing in between you and the networking taking place very soon. But distinguished guests and, of course, honorary minister, ladies and gentlemen, it's a big honor for me to be here in South Africa and tapping into your innovation ecosystem. I've learned so much tonight from the previous speakers that I will bring back to Sweden and continue evolving our innovation ecosystem. So I've been asked to be an international voice and share some of the lessons learned from Sweden. And I met a number of governments and countries asking themselves, how can we attract more private investments, international investments? And from my experience, I would say that private investments rarely comes first. It follows confidence, the confidence in institutions, in people, and in long-term political commitment. So public investment, when made strategically, unlocks for greater private investment. So let me share a little bit from a Swedish perspective. I'm sure you are all familiar with a small country up north, 10.5 million people, but a very innovative country and an innovation leader. And this didn't happen by chance. For more than a century, we deliberately combined public investment, private entrepreneurship, research, and industrial policy. Our government invested in research and education, infrastructure, and strategic procurement. Our industry invested in R&D, engineering, and commercialization. These have formed and shaped great companies, and I'm sure you are well aware of them. For instance, we have Ericsson, which in early days collaborated a lot with a public health telecommunication company called Telia. Without Telia, there would have not been an Ericsson. We also have ABB, which is the public electrification company called Vattenfall, which collaborated to form ABB, also present globally. And finally, we also have Saab, which have been formed by a close collaboration with the Swedish Armed Forces and the Swedish Defense Material Administration. Those companies are present here in South Africa, and I'm happy to note that they are employing about 1,000 people together today. So, also looking to the part of the public sector has a very important role when it comes to decreasing the risk. Many governments ask themselves, how can we finance innovation? But I rather think the question would be, how can public investment reduce risk? Because when risk is reduced, the private capital follows. And this creates for a positive cycle. Public investment is followed by private investment, which create new companies, new jobs, new tax revenues, and more investments. This is how innovation becomes economic development. I would also like to say that long-term partnerships create future industries, and I would like to take an example from my own region. For generations, the Wallenberg family, which you might have heard of, it's one of Sweden's leading industrial families and one of Europe's largest long-term investors in research, industry, and innovation. They have built a strategic relationship to NVIDIA. And they, with the help of NVIDIA, made great investments with the government into building infrastructure within Linköping University, who holds the National Center of Supercomputers. And last year we had the honor to receiving Jensen Huang, the founder and CEO of NVIDIA, in our city. And when he came there, because he was appointed honorary doctorate at Linköping University, he, together with Marcus Wallenberg, announced that they were going to start a new company called Spherical AI. and the AI data center is now operating in Linköping, in our city. This is an investment for about 1 billion Swedish crowns. And it is not just an AI data center. It's an AI data center that will actually help build competitiveness for the Swedish industry of the Wallenberg portfolio companies such as Ericsson, Saab, AstraZeneca, and the bank SEB. The AI initiative will prepare Swedish industry for the next generation of AI, giving them access to world-class computing infrastructure, AI capability, and research collaboration. And I would also like to stress that this investment did not come by chance. It builds on the trust and the relation and the shared ambition. Finally, I would also like to say that national government matters, but so does also the local governments and the cities. And Linköping Science Park, which I represent, have been operating for more than 4 decades. We are a publicly held company, and the Linköping municipality has invested in the science park for more than 4 decades. They have planned the land, built the first office space, and done investments into infrastructure. After the first phase, and when decreasing the risk, they invited the private sector to invest in the science park. And it has proven to become a really good business. Today we have more than 650 tech companies employing about 14,000 people, and with an annual revenue of about 40 billion Swedish crowns. And today, the city not only invests in buildings and infrastructure and in the institution that is Linköping Science Park, but they have also formed the city to become a testbed for new innovation within mobility, energy, and digital solutions. They serve as a first customer, a testing arena for new innovation, a convener, and a partner to SME companies. And for this, they were also awarded Innovative Capital of Europe in 2023. So, on the topic, and I'm so grateful for being here today to address you, I would like to stress the importance of investing, of course, in infrastructure over time, but also build the institutions. You have great infrastructure, you have the science park, you have the special economic zones, you have the institution, and you must invest in institutions and not the least in people. Because it's the continuity and the confidence that will help you attract the private capital following the public capital. Our science park has been around for 42 years, and the actors, they know that we will be there in 10 and 20 years ahead. So my last reflection would be that don't only ask yourself how much government can invest, but how every single public investment can unlock even greater private investment. You have all the challenges ahead of you, but you have at least as many opportunities as was mentioned before, and I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lina, for your wonderful reflections. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this evening's program. I'm sure for everyone an evening of thought-provoking discussion and truly riveting discussions as well. On behalf of the ST&I Business Forum, I extend our sincere gratitude to each of you for giving of your time to be part of this important conversation on science, technology, and innovation. Before we conclude, may I kindly ask that you remain seated while the Minister, his delegation, and our esteemed guests take their leave first. Thereafter, all invitees to the Minister's dinner are required to proceed through to the hall, where members of our team will direct you to the dinner venue. For all the other guests, please do join us for refreshments outside. Thank you once again for a wonderful evening, and travel safely. Thanks.